doing it, hey, oh, hiya, hiya, oh, yeah, So we live in a modern age, and what's a poor boy to do? What's a poor girl to do? Confusion reigns, so we got to go to the multiplex. We've got to find out truth via the cinema. Of course, it's not called cinema, it's called moving pictures, the movies, films. So we're, so we go for a multitude of reasons, none of which are conscious. But in addition to the need to be entertained, which that itself is a pretty mushy word. Most words are mushy. Most words don't have a clear meaning. They have a whole range of meanings. And mostly, each individual who hears or reads words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, basically constructs the meaning out of their own knowledge, out of their own experience. What makes sense to them? Objective truth is a bit of a ridiculous thing. The only way that we approach objective truth is in very limited areas of life. I want to stress that these are limited. The hard sciences, the physical sciences, we can measure them so precisely, it's amazing. We have instruments that can delve into all sorts of invisible realms of physical reality. And because the measurements through instruments is so precise, scientists around the world can replicate the experiments. They can agree to a great extent on what is true. But this does not apply to the human realm. It is impossible, it is foolish, it is frigging stupid. And I'm so angry because there's so much suffering that comes from trying to apply science to human beings, to trying to apply the scientific method to human beings. We cannot be measured. We cannot be measured. There are too many variables. Are you going to pin a human being down on a piece of board and analyze them? You can't do that. You can't measure human beings the way you can physical materials, physical objects. Therefore, without the measurements, you cannot find any agreed upon knowledge. Now, obviously people think they have agreed upon knowledge, but this isn't far from everybody believing the same fairy tale. Because just because everybody believes something it ain't necessarily so. It doesn't make it true. For some reason we have these communities of understanding within the humanities that people agree is true. But those communities are rarely monolithic. There's usually within the humanities various communities of understanding that argue with each other as to what is real. Okay, this is most obvious in the political sphere, where you have conservative and liberal political communities, which are loose collections. Within each of them you have various different opinions. So when it comes to human beings, when it comes to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we don't have any definitive knowledge. And I don't care how much you think what you know is true. Because if I try, I can find someone who thinks something very different, who's just as convinced. So how do you know? How's a third party supposed to discern? And it's not just two sides to the coin. There's thousands of stories. Some which get, recognized as having more authority than others. But this is why we have this messy, and sometimes horrifying democracy. Horrifying in the sense of how little it can actually do. Horrifying in the sense that there's all this conflict that creates the gridlock within the governing leadership. But a lot of people are glad that there's that gridlock, because again, they're glad that there isn't an agreed upon story, because they may disagree with it, because that story becomes policy, that policy becomes law, that law becomes coercive, and you have to, and other individuals have to abide by the results of those policies that become law. This is the heart of the conservative and libertarian protest against government, is that it's coercive. And to some extent, that has to be, recognized and understood. The problem is that the conservative ideology goes beyond that, and they say, and they give gobbledygook, stories as to how prosperity is going to happen, stuff like that. Sometimes it takes people deciding to listen. We're all going to agree on a story. We're going to build, the government's going to build the Transcontinental Railroad. It's going to give away land in the process to the railroad companies who are going to, profit tremendously from it. People are going to argue, but, this is the way it's going to get done. This is the way it gets done, and we've got a Transcontinental Railroad, So sometimes you got to agree on something, even if you disagree, just to get something done. Because we are a cooperative, dare I say, organism. Society is a cooperative organism. And complete freedom can mean complete chaos, everybody conflicting with each other. So sometimes, at the best, democracy is the willingness of people to set aside their own story, their own beliefs, and say, for the sake of getting something done, I'm going to abide by the will of the majority, which isn't really the majority. I'm going to abide by the will of the messy process of representative democracy, which, some people may argue as to who it represents more than, some people more than others. But besides that, believe it or not, I don't see any political understanding as being definitively true. I see, and so I see conservative and liberal forces acting within society, but there are other forces. The political forces are really very, I don't want to say insignificant, they're significant, but they're not as dominant as the everyday forces of what I call the set of institutional communities, corporations, the day-to-day government bureaucracies, the military, the transportation systems, the schools, everything that is institutional and organizational. This is the reality that sort of persists and has a momentum fairly much, only modified slightly by the shifting political winds. Okay? So sorry about that. I don't like to talk about politics. I don't like to talk about politics. But to some extent, it's a common story. We observe the media. The media loves controversy. It loves to report the bickerings and the fights and the insults that politicians, throw at one another in order to gain your precious little vote. So, where was I? The point is that there's a huge abundance of life. A huge abundance of people interacting every day in complex patterns, complex social patterns. From the household, to the workplace, to, huge national, corporate and government institutions. All this is going on all the time. But the stories we have about it are basically fairy tales because it's too complex to understand. Now I'm talking about you, Mr. and Mrs. Academic. Your stories may be more complex than the average Joe's, but it ain't necessarily true. And the only reason that you think it's true is because you have some buddies who will pat you on the back and say, "That was a brilliant paper," Or you have some students who want to get a degree, so they're going to, they're going to parrot back the agreed upon stories that you tell them and that you assign them to read. But it ain't necessarily so. So, what's a good man and a good woman to do? Well, you got to go on. You got to go on. But the doubt as to whether it's really true or not, that doubt may be valuable in that maybe you can be open to modifying the stories that you grew up with. No matter how many, straight A papers you wrote